Stop whatever you are doing right now. I need you to close every other tab. I need you to silence every single notification on your phone, because what I am about to walk you through is not a basketball story. It is not a feel-good off-season update. It is not the kind of polished, carefully sanitized content you are used to consuming from the corporate media machine that has been desperately trying to manage this narrative for the past several weeks. What is happening inside the Indiana Fever organization right now is a full-scale, open warfare corporate mutiny. And it did not start in the boardroom. It did not start with a leaked front office memo. It started with one sentence, one specific, carefully worded, publicly delivered sentence from the most commercially powerful athlete in the history of women's professional basketball. And the moment that sentence left Caitlin Clark's mouth, the entire Indiana Fever locker room, the one they spent an entire season selling to you as an unbreakable sisterhood, began collapsing from the inside out. I am going to walk you through every single layer of what is happening: the financial mechanics, the media strategy, the psychological warfare, and most critically, the cold, unforgiving mathematical reality of what comes next for every player involved. Welcome to Courtside Leaks. We do not deal in narratives here. We deal in numbers, leverage, and truth. Let us begin at the origin point of this entire crisis, because context is everything in corporate warfare. And if you do not understand exactly what was said and why it was said, you will fundamentally misread every single event that follows. The WNBA offseason is, at its core, a highly sensitive political negotiation environment. Every public statement made by every significant player in this ecosystem, every interview, every podcast appearance, every casual social media post is being actively dissected by agents, general managers, rival front offices, and financial advisors in real time. This is not hyperbole. This is the operational reality of a professional sports economy that has been permanently and irrevocably transformed by the arrival of one specific athlete. Caitlin Clark did not just become a basketball player when she entered the WNBA. She became the single most commercially significant asset in the history of women's professional sports. Her rookie season generated television rating spikes, merchandise revenue, and arena attendance figures that the league had never seen in its entire history. She did not just fill seats, she redefined what a seat in this league was worth. And that level of economic gravity does not come without consequences. Specifically, it does not come without the power and the responsibility of public endorsement. So when Caitlin Clark stepped in front of the global media apparatus and explicitly stated that re-signing Kelsey Mitchell was the absolute top priority for the Indiana Fever heading into free agency, she was not making a casual fan comment. She was not being interviewed by a local Indiana sports radio station where maybe 3,000 people would hear it and move on with their day. She was making a boardroom declaration. She was using her unprecedented commercial leverage to publicly anoint one specific asset as the financially indispensable piece of the franchise's future. And in doing so, whether she fully understood the downstream consequences or not, she simultaneously and publicly devalued every other player in that locker room. Think about that from a pure corporate mechanics standpoint. When the CEO of the global basketball economy publicly declares that one specific employee is the top financial priority for an organization operating inside a strictly regulated, mathematically finite salary cap environment, every other employee in that organization immediately receives the same message. And that message is not subtle. That message is, you are not the priority. The money is spoken for. Figure out what that means for your own negotiation. The Indiana Fever's salary cap is not a bottomless well. It is a finite, legally enforced financial structure. Every single dollar committed to Kelsey Mitchell's supermax contract is a dollar that is permanently unavailable for any other player. And Caitlin Clark, intentionally or not, just announced to the entire world exactly where the majority of those dollars were going. The ripple effect of that statement was instantaneous and devastating, and nobody felt it more acutely than the two women who had spent the entire previous season doing the most physically demanding, statistically under-rewarded, and commercially unrecognized work on that roster. Before we go any further, I need you to understand exactly what Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham actually are as basketball assets, because the mainstream media has done an almost criminally inadequate job of explaining their true value to this franchise. And if you do not understand their value, you cannot understand why their current leverage strategy is so sophisticated and so dangerous to the Fever's front office. In the modern professional basketball economy, there is a specific and extremely valuable category of player that financial analysts call the perimeter enforcer. These are players who do not produce the highlight reel statistics that drive jersey sales and social media engagement. They do not post 30-point games. They do not generate the kind of box score numbers that casual fans track on their phones during the third quarter. What they do is fundamentally more important to the actual functioning of a competitive basketball team. They sacrifice their own offensive opportunities, their own statistical accumulation, and in many cases, their own physical health to create the defensive environment in which the primary offensive assets can operate freely. Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull are elite perimeter enforcers. They are the players who take the physically punishing assignments. They guard the opposition's most dangerous perimeter threats. They set the screens that create open looks for the players whose names are on the marquee. And perhaps most critically and most commercially significant for the Indiana Fever specifically, they are the players who put their own bodies directly between Caitlin Clark and anyone who attempted to physically disrupt her game. You remember what happened during the 2024 WNBA season. The veteran establishment of this league spent a significant portion of the first half of the season attempting to physically intimidate the most commercially valuable athlete in women's basketball. There were flagrant fouls, there were late hits, there were moments that genuinely required the intervention of other players to prevent escalation. And in multiple documented situations, it was Sophie Cunningham specifically who stepped directly into those confrontations. She did not calculate the statistical consequence of that choice. She did not consult an agent or weigh the financial implications. She protected the billion-dollar asset because she understood that the billion-dollar asset needed to be protected. That is not just loyalty. In the language of sports economics, that is an indispensable organizational function. You cannot put a traditional statistical value on what Sophie Cunningham did for Caitlin Clark's ability to operate freely on that court. But here is the brutal reality of the free market. The free market absolutely does not care about what you cannot put a statistical value on. The free market cares about efficiency metrics, health records, and comparable contract offers from competing organizations. And here is where Sophie Cunningham's corporate valuation becomes genuinely complicated. Her 2024 season, in which she averaged a highly respectable 8.6 points per game along with 1.7 three-pointers made per game, was violently cut short after exactly 30 games due to a catastrophically significant torn MCL in her right knee, a structural knee injury. In the hyper-efficient modern sports economy, that specific medical data point does not just affect her current negotiating position, it defines it. It becomes the primary variable in every actuarial calculation that every general manager in this league runs before committing guaranteed long-term capital to her contract. And simultaneously, the Indiana Fever front office is operating under an expansion draft protection requirement that forces them to mathematically prioritize exactly 5 players on their roster. 5, not 6, not 7, not the 10 or 11 players who have contributed meaningfully to this franchise's trajectory. 5. And in a roster environment where Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell are already consuming the majority of the franchise's financial oxygen, the arithmetic surrounding the 5th protection slot becomes an exercise in cold, clinical asset prioritization. Sophie Cunningham, an unrestricted free agent recovering from a major knee injury, does not mathematically survive that calculation. The front office is not going to publicly announce this. They are not going to call a press conference and explain to the Indiana fan base that one of the most loyal players in their locker room is being left exposed to the expansion syndicates because the math simply does not work. But the decision is being made in a windless war room right now, and Sophie Cunningham knows it. Here is where I need to introduce the concept that I believe is the most critical and most underanalyzed variable in this entire situation. And I want to be direct about this because I think it is something that a lot of people, including potentially Lexi Hall and Sophie Cunningham themselves, have not fully reckoned with. The commercial value that both of these players have accumulated over the past season, the sponsorships, the brand partnerships, the social media followings, the podcast audiences, the overall market recognition that is currently allowing them to execute this media offensive, did not originate from their individual basketball performances. It originated almost entirely from their physical and professional proximity to Caitlin Clark. This is what I call the shadow economy phenomenon. When you orbit an economic singularity of the magnitude that Caitlin Clark represents, you benefit enormously from the gravitational pull of that singularity in ways that are very easy to misattribute to your own independent brand equity. Sponsors do not just want access to Lexi Hull's followers. They want access to Lexi Hull's followers who are Caitlin Clark fans, who followed Hull because she was Clark's teammate and the content involving their relationship was commercially compelling. Those are not equivalent things. The brutal mathematical reality that every player in that locker room needs to honestly confront is this. The Indiana Fever, specifically and exclusively because of Caitlin Clark's presence, is the single most commercially oversaturated media environment in women's professional basketball. Every player on that roster benefits from elevated visibility, elevated sponsorship interest, and elevated public engagement that would evaporate not gradually but immediately and completely the moment they step outside of that ecosystem. Portland and Toronto are exciting new markets with empty salary caps and aggressive acquisition strategies. They are going to offer significant guaranteed money to perimeter players who are currently available. That is a real and legitimate market dynamic. But those organizations are not Caitlin Clark. They are not generating the television ratings, the arena attendance figures, the merchandise revenue, or the social media engagement that makes Indianapolis the most commercially valuable location for a women's basketball player to operate in right now. And if Cunningham or Hull accept a premium contract offer from a rival organization specifically to extract maximum capital from this free agency window, they may win the short-term financial battle while simultaneously surrendering the long-term brand infrastructure that is currently the foundation of their leverage. This is the uncomfortable paradox at the center of their entire negotiation strategy. The leverage they are currently using to demand premium capital is derived almost entirely from the asset whose gravitational pull they would be abandoning in order to extract that capital. Let us now examine this situation from the Indiana Fever front office's perspective, because understanding their constraints is essential to predicting how this situation resolves. The Fever are operating inside a mathematical reality that leaves them with essentially zero flexibility for sentimentality. They have already committed, either explicitly or implicitly through Caitlin Clark's public endorsement, to prioritizing the resources necessary to re-sign Kelsey Mitchell at or near the supermax level. Mitchell is a 27-year-old all-star caliber guard in the prime of her basketball career who has already proven she can operate productively alongside Clark's offensive system. From a pure asset management standpoint, that commitment is defensible. But the downstream consequence of that commitment is stark. If the Fever successfully re-sign Mitchell at supermax or near supermax valuation, and if they simultaneously attempt to retain both Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham at the contract levels that Hull and Cunningham are currently publicly suggesting they deserve, the roster construction mathematics become genuinely catastrophic. You are looking at a scenario where 3 significant salary commitments consume the vast majority of your available cap space, leaving you with either a severely depleted supporting cast or a roster filled with minimum contract players who are trying to complement one of the most offensively sophisticated backcourts in the league. That is not a championship construction. That is a roster that looks spectacular on paper in October and collapses in the fourth quarter of a playoff elimination game in September when the defensive rotations break down because you do not have the depth to maintain high-effort defensive intensity for 40 minutes. The front office's optimal strategy, the one that maximizes the franchise's long-term competitive viability, involves retaining Mitchell at market value, making a genuine but cap-conscious offer to Lexi Hull, and allowing Sophie Cunningham to test the open market with the full knowledge that her medically complicated situation may naturally calibrate the offers she receives to a level Indiana can eventually match. It is a cold calculation. It's a borderline disloyal calculation, given what Cunningham did for this franchise in the season prior. But it is the calculation that a fiduciarily responsible front office is almost certainly running right now. The danger, and this is the specific nightmare scenario for Indiana, is that Portland or Toronto, operating with fully open salary caps and the specific strategic objective of acquiring credible veteran talent to surround their expansion rosters, decides to dramatically overpay Cunningham purely as a destabilization maneuver. They don't necessarily need Sophie Cunningham to be a foundational piece of their franchise future, but they absolutely benefit from Sophie Cunningham not being in Indianapolis protecting Caitlin Clark. That specific competitive dynamic makes Sophie Cunningham a more valuable acquisition target for the expansion teams than her pure basketball metrics alone would suggest.
What this entire situation ultimately reveals is something far more significant than one team's offseason roster decisions. It represents the complete and permanent transformation of the WNBA's economic power structure. For most of this league's history, players operated inside a financial environment characterized by what I would describe as the loyalty discount. Veteran players accepted below-market contracts to maintain team chemistry, to avoid the disruption of relocation, and because the alternative, leaving for a rival team that might offer marginally more guaranteed money, rarely felt worth the organizational and social costs. The cap numbers were low enough across the board that the financial differential between loyalty and open market extraction was not significant enough to justify the emotional and logistical upheaval of free agency. The new CBA has permanently ended that era. The salary cap has increased dramatically. The supermax contract here represents a genuine, life-altering financial commitment that did not exist in meaningful form for most of these players' careers. The stakes of every single free agency negotiation have been elevated by an order of magnitude, and the players, led by exactly the kind of sophisticated, media-savvy operators that Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull are demonstrating themselves to be, have fully internalized what that means for their own negotiating behavior. The polite era of voluntary financial sacrifice for locker room harmony is over. It ended the moment the first supermax contract was signed, and every front office in this league that fails to update their negotiating assumptions accordingly is going to find themselves exactly where the Indiana Fever currently find themselves, watching their own players launch an unsanctioned media offensive from a podcast studio while the general manager tries to figure out how to respond without creating a precedent that further empowers every other player in the league to do the same thing. This is the new reality, and the organizations that navigate it most effectively, that retain the right assets at the right valuations without either capitulating to media pressure or allowing critical players to walk to rival organizations, are going to be the organizations competing for championships. The ones that panic or overcorrect or allow the noise to dictate their financial decisions are going to be the ones rebuilding in 3 years, wondering where everything went wrong. So where does this actually end? The most probable outcome, based purely on the financial mathematics and the organizational leverage dynamics at play, looks something like this.
Kelsey Mitchell signs a supermax or near supermax extension with the Indiana Fever. This was always the most likely outcome, and Caitlin Clark's public endorsement made it essentially inevitable. Lexi Hull receives a genuine competitive offer from Indiana and ultimately resigns because her injury history is cleaner, her defensive versatility is slightly broader, and her cap figure, while elevated from what the Fever might prefer, remains within the range of what their rebuilt roster construction can absorb. Sophie Cunningham is the variable that nobody can confidently predict right now. Her leverage is real. Her media platform is active and engaged. Her willingness to publicly negotiate through a podcast is demonstrably proven. But her medical situation, combined with the expansion draft dynamics and the mathematical constraints of Indiana's cap commitments, creates a scenario where the market itself may not generate the kind of offers she and her platform are currently suggesting she deserves. Portland and Toronto are watching. They have the capital, and one of them, almost certainly, is going to make a move specifically designed to test whether the Indiana Fever value Sophie Cunningham enough to match or exceed a competitive offer from an expansion roster with an entirely different set of financial incentives. Whether Indiana matches that offer, whether they decide that what Cunningham provides in terms of locker room culture, defensive competency, and Clark protection is worth the financial commitments in a cap environment where every dollar matters, that is the decision that will define the next 2 to 3 years of this franchise's competitive trajectory. The Civil War is active, the financial stakes are unprecedented, and every move made in the next 60 days is going to reverberate through this organization for the rest of this decade. Now, here is something that I need to say directly to you before you navigate away from this video. You just watched every other outlet report on this story as a feel-good chemistry narrative. You watched them interview players and produce content that carefully avoided the actual financial mechanics driving every single decision in this situation. You consumed the version of this story that the front office wanted you to consume, the one where everyone is still friends and everything is going to work out beautifully. You came here and got the actual version, the mathematical version, the one built on cap numbers, medical actuarial data, expansion draft protection formulas, and the cold structural reality of what a supermax commitment actually does to every other contract conversation in the building. There are exactly 2 kinds of people who watch basketball content. There are the people who consume what they are given, and there are the people who understand what is actually happening and use that understanding to be genuinely ahead of every conversation, every trade deadline, every free agency signing, every playoff matchup. The subscribe button for this channel is the single most consequential action you can take if you want to be in the second category, because this is the only place where you are going to get this level of analytical depth on every single major WNBA business story for the entire season. Not the emotional version, not the manufactured version, the real one. Hit that subscribe button right now before you watch the next video on your feed that is going to give you the polished, sanitized version of something I will be breaking down at the structural level within 24 hours. Drop your prediction in the comments below. Does Sophie Cunningham stay in Indianapolis, or does she take the Portland or Toronto money? Does the podcast offensive give Hull and Cunningham more leverage than their pure basketball metrics justify? And most importantly, which expansion organization is willing to overpay specifically to destabilize the Indiana Fever's perimeter depth? Give me your most analytically rigorous prediction, because in 6 weeks, we are going to come back to this video and we are going to see exactly whose financial instincts were correct. The corporate civil war is active, and the highly emotional will absolutely be left behind. I will see you in the next breakdown.